The air itself is a heavy, humid velvet, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. Imagine, for a moment, that you are standing at the edge of time, where the immense canopy of the rainforest exhales slowly, meeting the limitless sky. The sun, a molten pearl behind a gauze of morning mist, has not yet climbed high enough to pierce the green gloom, leaving the world suspended in a cool, deep twilight. Listen closely. The sounds are not sharp or sudden. They are a complex, ancient symphony. The low thrum of cicadas, a constant pulse of life, is punctuated by the distant, echoing call of a jungle fowl and the subtle, incessant drip of moisture from the enormous, glistening leaves. This is the Tonle Sap, the Great Lake, breathing in the heart of the world. And this is the land that will one day hold the breathtaking stones of Angkor. Take a deep, slow breath. Welcome. Over the next 6 parts, we will embark on a quiet, immersive journey through the creation of the greatest city the world had ever seen, the capital of the Khmer Empire. Let the gentle rhythm of this story be your anchor. We will explore the silent devotion, the colossal engineering, and the profound connection to the divine that shaped this magnificent civilization, leading you deeper into a state of tranquil contemplation. The earliest movements of the Khmer people were dictated entirely by the water. Their lives were not marked by seasons of spring, summer, and autumn, but by the relentless, monumental cycle of the Mekong River and the Great Lake it feeds. The Great Lake, the Tonle Sap, is an anomaly of nature, a biological miracle that reverses its flow twice a year. During the long, dry months, the lake shrinks to a relatively modest size, its waters retreating, exposing vast tracts of fertile silt that glow a rich, dark brown under the relentless tropical sun. But when the monsoon rains arrive, a deluge that can last 4 months, the sheer volume of water cascading down the Mekong is so immense that it forces its way back up the connecting river. Slowly, inexorably, the Tonle Sap swells. It expands its surface area 5-fold, sometimes more, transforming the landscape from dry, arable plains into an inland sea, pushing its boundaries far out into the jungle, drowning forests, and creating an immense, transient water kingdom. This annual, silent expansion was the first, most powerful deity the early Khmer people worshipped, for it was the source of all their sustenance. In those very early times, long before the monumental temples were even dreamt of, life was lived. On the water, or close enough to it to feel the pulse of the flood. Imagine the daily choreography. The fishermen in their small, narrow pirogues, carved from single logs, paddling silently through the half-submerged forest. The air is thick with the smell of the lake, a slightly metallic, earthy odor mingling with the sweet smell of the water hyacinth. The nets they use are fine, expertly woven from local fibers, designed to harvest the miraculous bounty of the lakefish, so plentiful that they were not merely a food source, but a foundational pillar of their civilization. The sound of the net being thrown is a soft, satisfying shush against the water, followed by the quiet ripple as it settles. Everything is slow, deliberate, respecting the powerful, often treacherous presence of the water. As the sun climbs higher, penetrating the mist, the colors intensify. The water turns a deep, jade green, the mudflats become a richer, almost purplish brown, and the sky achieves that washed-out, brilliant blue so common in the tropics. Along the edges of the dry ground, women are tending small patches of rice. This early cultivation is humble, a secondary concern to the fish, but it is the silent promise of a more settled future. The clothing worn by these people is practical, made from simple cotton, often hand-woven. The sampot, a versatile garment wrapped and folded around the lower body, allows for ease of movement in the water and the fields. The colors are derived from natural dyes: the dusty red of madder root, the muted yellow of turmeric, the soft blues from indigo leaves. They are not ostentatious. They blend into the background of earth and water, a testament to a life lived in harmony with the immediate environment. Their homes are simple, raised on tall wooden stilts, a necessary precaution against the annual flood. Imagine the feeling of climbing the narrow, worn ladder up to the house in the evening. The floorboards are wide, rough planks, cooled by the breeze that drifts in through the open sides. The entire structure is sheltered beneath a thick, dark thatch roof which smells faintly of dried grass and wood smoke. In the heart of the village, the center of their simple communal life, stands a small, unpretentious shrine. It is not made of stone yet, but of wood, perhaps adorned with intricate carvings done with a simple knife, depicting local nature spirits, or necktie, and the beginnings of imported Hindu deities. The smell of burning incense, a sweet, smoky, resinous scent, is a constant presence, a quiet acknowledgement that the visible world is but a small part of the whole. This time, this foundational period, is an era of small, scattered principalities, each revolving around a minor chieftain or a revered local spirit. There is no great, unified empire yet, only a loose constellation of settlements, united by the water and the shared dependence on rice and fish. The path to unification, to the building of Angkor, would begin with the gradual mastery of the very forces that defined their lives, the water. Imagine the elders sitting in the cool shade beneath the stilt houses, their skin like weathered leather, their voices low and resonant. They speak of the great flood, of the harvest, of the importance of sharing the bounty. Their communication is often accompanied by the quiet whirring of simple hand fans woven from palm fronds circulating the heavy air. The atmosphere is one of profound, deep-rooted continuity. The first true shift, the slow tectonic movement toward centralization, came with the realization that the chaotic power of the water could be harnessed, disciplined, and directed. It was a conceptual leap as enormous as any physical feat of engineering. Instead of merely adapting to the flood, what if they could manage it? What if they could store the monsoon's excess for the dry season? This thought, this fundamental ambition, was the seed of the empire. In the small, growing settlements that would eventually form the core of the nascent state, men began to dig. Not for treasure, but for life itself. The first berets, the vast, rectangular, man-made reservoirs, were initially nothing more than large, ambitious ponds. The labor was backbreaking, performed under the crushing heat of the midday sun. The smell of disturbed, damp earth and the salty sweat of labor filled the air. The sound was a rhythmic scraping of tools, the thud of dirt being dumped, and the low, chant-like songs used to coordinate the work and maintain a steady rhythm. This was not the quick, frantic pace of a modern construction site. It was a slow, meditative, communal effort, stretching over months, maybe years, for even the smallest reservoirs. The first small dikes and canals, painstakingly carved out of the earth, began to appear, tracing delicate, intentional lines across the flat landscape. These channels were designed to draw water from the rivers and guide it into the dry fields during the non-monsoon months. When the water finally flowed into these new channels for the first time, it was a moment of profound, quiet triumph. With reliable water management, the rice harvest grew predictable. No longer were the people entirely dependent on the whims of the annual flood. They could plant more, and the harvests were more stable. The sheer caloric energy unlocked by this innovation, the ability to feed a large, concentrated population, is the material precondition for any great civilization. The simple grain of rice, consistently supplied, became the fuel for the coming empire. Villages, once scattered, began to coalesce around these new water sources. The center of power shifted subtly from those who simply possessed land to those who could control the water that made the land fruitful. This required a new type of leader, one capable of organization, planning, and demanding the coordinated labor of hundreds, then thousands of people. The people who undertook this work began to realize their collective strength. Imagine the sheer scale of moving tons of earth with nothing but human muscle and simple tools. The sound of their work became the heartbeat of their society, a slow, steady, indefatigable commitment to the future. Every shovel of earth moved, every channel dug, was an act of faith in the rising power of their community. The air around these emerging centers of power began to change. While still humid, it was tinged now with a new scent, the scent of growing permanence. The simple wooden buildings started to become more elaborate. The carvings on the shrines grew more detailed. This is the era of the first true kings, The men who would take the simple authority of the local chieftain and elevate it through the potent combination of water management and religious sanction. The earliest of these figures, residing in emerging capitals like Hariharalaya, are shadowy figures to us now, but their impact was real and profound. They imported and adapted sophisticated concepts from India, primarily Hinduism, to buttress their claims to earthly power. Hinduism, with its complex pantheon of deities, Vishnu the preserver, Shiva the destroyer, Brahma the creator, offered a ready-made framework for absolute kingship. The king was not just a powerful man. He was a Devaraja, a god-king, a living conduit between the divine realm and the earth. His power was cosmically justified. The first stone temples that appeared were humble, by later standards, built not of the vast, perfect sandstone blocks of Angkor, but of smaller, more manageable kiln-fired brick. These brick structures, often dedicated to Shiva, rose from the flat landscape, stark red geometric forms against the green jungle and blue sky. They were the first tangible evidence that the ephemeral nature of the jungle could be resisted, that the Khmer could build to last. Imagine the feel of the brick rough. It warmed to the touch, smelling faintly of the clay it was made from. Unlike the constantly decaying wood, these structures were meant to endure. A physical manifestation of the king's eternal rule and the permanent nature of the divine order he represented. This slow shift from water-dependent subsistence to hydraulically powered kingdom, from local chieftain to god-king, from ephemeral wood to enduring brick, is the foundation of everything that is to come. The geography itself informed the political structure. To control the water was to control the people. To control the people was to control the labor. And to control the labor was to command the resources necessary to build a grand city. In the settlements that grew in the region of what would become the vast Angkor complex, a new quality of light began to emerge. Not just the hazy light of the sun, but the internal light of an ambitious, focused society. Even the very air seems to vibrate with a suppressed energy, an anticipation of the monumental labors to come. The people, now subjects of the rising Devaraja, went about their days with a disciplined calm. Their rice fields vast, emerald squares neatly bordered by irrigation ditches stretched out under the sun. A beautiful testament to human order, imposed on nature's wildness. The scent of the flowering rice plants, a subtle, earthy sweetness, drifted across the fields. The sounds of this new, established life are different from the earlier, purely natural symphony. Now there is the distant, rhythmic clang of a blacksmith hammering iron tools, plowshares, axes, and weapons. There is the steady thwack of wood being split for construction. These are the sounds of civilization taking hold, of a community turning its back on mere survival and looking toward organized prosperity. As we settle deeper into this tranquil, ancient world, remember that the great temple city of Angkor Wat did not spring up overnight. It was forged first in the mud and water of the Tonle Sap, nurtured by the rice fields, and formalized in the slow, solemn rituals dedicated to the god-kings who mastered the water. This is the quiet prelude. The stage is set with fertile earth, disciplined water, and anascent unifying faith. The air is still, heavy with expectation, much like the moments just before a great curtain is drawn. The sun sets, casting long, deep shadows from the new brick temples. The sounds of the day slowly recede, replaced once more by the constant, soothing hum of the cicadas and the distant, unseen movements of the jungle. Sleep comes easily here, in the shadow of the rising power, on the stable ground promised by the ordered water. We leave this scene not on a sudden event, but on the enduring quality of the light fading across the vast, prepared plain. This quiet, controlled landscape, the organized water, the fertile fields, the solemn brick, is the true beginning of the Great Khmer Dream. The Age of the Great Khmer Empire. Part 2. The Sacred Mountain and the Founding King. We return to the flat, fertile plains of the Khmer heartland, where the rhythms of water and rice continue their slow, predictable dance. The first tentative brick temples, the dedicated labor of the early kings, have solidified the concept of Devaraja the god-king, but the realm remains fragile. A collection of strong regional centers, bound together by the necessity of shared water management. rather than a truly unified imperial will. The air here remains thick with the scent of water and life, but now beneath that, there's the subtle aroma of wood smoke and the persistent metallic tang of bronze casting. The court, though still relatively small, is growing in complexity. The king's presence is felt not just in the fields, but in the newly structured administrative hierarchy, the ministers, priests, and military commanders who serve to execute his divine will on earth. Imagine the palace compound of this time. Not a stone fortress, but an intricate network of polished, dark teak and ironwood raised high above the ground. The roofs are multi-tiered, covered in rich, dark tiles that glint subtly in the filtered sunlight. Inside, the floors are cool beneath the feet, perpetually swept and polished. The sounds are hushed, the soft rustle of expensive silk robes, the faint chime of bronze bells carried on the wind and the measured, respectful steps of courtiers. The clothing of the elite is markedly different from the simple cotton of the labourers. Here, the sampod is made of fine, imported silk, sometimes brocaded with gold thread, indicating status and proximity to the divine king. The king himself is adorned not with heavy gold, but with meticulously crafted bronze jewelry and a simple, yet imposing, cotton headdress, often bearing the image of his patron deity, Shiva. This fragile unity required a visionary, the true shift, the catalyst that would birth the magnificent Khmer Empire, came with a single, defining action by a man whose legacy still echoes in the massive stones he inspired, Jayavarman II. The historical record of Jayavarman II's early life is shrouded in mist and legend, but the narrative of his return from Java, whether literally from the island or simply a generic term for the distant east, is the cultural hinge upon which the history of Angkor turns. He arrived not as a conqueror, but as a claimant to a destiny grander than any local chieftain had yet imagined. Imagine his arrival, the scent of salt and unfamiliar spices still clinging to his clothes. He carried not merely soldiers, but ideas, concepts of centralized power and cosmic kingship that were far more potent than any army. He recognized that the Khmer people were united by the water, but they needed to be unified by a single, untouchable, and supremely powerful spiritual center. His early movements were deliberate and slow, a careful weaving of alliances and conquest that took decades. He moved his capital multiple times, perhaps seeking the perfect nexus point between the major rice fields and the river systems, always testing the political landscape. Each move was a statement, a slow, methodical accumulation of spiritual and temporal authority. The soldiers who guarded him were not clad in heavy, clanking metal armor, which would be impractical in the heat. Instead, they wore thick, lacquered leather and hardened buffalo hide, dyed black and red. The sounds of their marching were not the sharp clash of boots, but the soft, rhythmic thud of bare or sandaled feet on the dust, and the gentle creak of their simple crossbows and bamboo quivers. The culmination of Jayavarman II's ambition, the moment that officially inaugurated the Khmer Empire, was the sacred ritual performed in 802 AD. He did not choose a bustling settlement for this, but a solitary, powerful mountain, Mount Mahendra Parvata, known today as Phnom Kulen. This was a journey of profound significance. The king and his entourage spent days ascending the thickly forested slopes of the mountain. Imagine the effort. The air growing cooler, the sound of rushing water from the mountain streams becoming louder, replacing the gentle lake sounds of the lowlands. The smell of the jungle here is different, cooler, mossier, carrying the scent of damp stone and wild orchids. They followed winding paths, carved over centuries by water erosion and the passage of animals. The sunlight barely penetrates the canopy, leaving the forest floor in a state of perpetual, shimmering green twilight. The sound of their breath is heavy as they climb, their footsteps muted by the deep leaf litter. At the mountain's summit, in place deemed sacred because of its height and its status as a source of the life-giving rivers, Jayavarman II performed the ultimate ritual, the consecration of the Devaraja cult. This was not a quick ceremony. It was a prolonged, complex, and highly exclusive event. Overseen by a high-ranking Brahmin, priest summoned specifically for this purpose, the ritual was focused on installing the linga, the phallic, symbol of the Hindu god Shiva, which was believed to contain the very, essence of the king's spirit and the power of the divine mandate. The linga was housed in a simple, temporary shrine, carved perhaps into the living rock of the mountaintop. The sounds of the ritual were primal and deeply resonant. The continuous, low chanting of Sanskrit mantras, the sharp, pure ring of a bronze ritual bell, the occasional hiss of ghee poured onto the sacred fire. The light of the fire danced, illuminating the faces of the small group of witnesses, the inner core of the burgeoning empire casting long, flickering shadows on the surrounding forest. Through this act, Jayavarman II accomplished two colossal things. He declared the Khmer realm utterly independent of any foreign power, like Java, and more importantly, he positioned himself as the sole divine agent on earth. He was no longer just a powerful man. He was the Chakravartin, the universal monarch, who ruled from a cosmic center. The mountain itself became the symbolic Mount Meru, the axis of the Hindu cosmos. This concept, the king's capital as the center of the universe, would become the architectural and philosophical blueprint for every major Khmer construction poem for the next 4 centuries. Following this mountain consecration, Jayavarman II descended and established his final, permanent capital, Hariharalaya, near the area known today as Roluos. The focus now shifted from the abstract, inaccessible mountain peak to a structured, tangible replication of the cosmos on the flat, terrestrial plane. The city he built was designed to be perfectly ordered, a reflection of the cosmic order he had claimed. This meant a renewed, intense focus on the hydraulic system. His engineers, directed by the king's vision, expanded the existing irrigation networks into a highly integrated system of canals and massive barrays. The sound of the construction intensified. Now it was not just the slow thud of simple digging, but the coordinated labor of thousands of workers hauling earth and stone. The air was filled with a constant, low, rhythmic grunting and pulling, the collective sound of a society bending the landscape to its will. The smell of wet mud and sun-baked earth was pervasive. These early temples of the Roluos group, built toward the end of Jayavarman II's life and by his successors, are the physical realization of the mountain ritual. They are pyramid-shaped, terraced temple mountains, built of brick and laterite. They are attempts to produce the divine Mount Meru on the flat earth, making the king's cosmic connection accessible to his people and visible to his court. Imagine approaching one of these early temple mountains. The ground beneath your feet transitions from soft dust to packed earth, then to rough, red laterite stone used for the outer enclosure walls. The walls are immensely thick, giving a sense of eternal permanence. The central climb is steep, designed to be an ascent both physical and spiritual. These steps are tall, uneven, and worn smooth by centuries of bare feet. As you climb, the world below the flat fields, the dusty city, the mundane concerns of daily life slowly recedes, reinforcing the king's elevated position at the summit. The clothing of the people participating in the temple ceremonies would be clean, fresh cotton. The priests, or purohita, are the keepers of the sacred texts and rituals. They move with an almost unnerving stillness, their white or saffron robes creating soft, rustling sounds as they walk. The air inside the temple compound is cooler, imbued with the rich, deep scent of sandalwood and old stone. The carvings on these early temples are simple but powerful, depicting guardians, celestial dancers, apsaras, and scenes from Hindu epics carved into the brick or laterite with a strong, definitive line. The focus is less on delicate beauty and more on theological strength and political legitimacy. Every carved figure is a silent declaration of the king's divine patronage. Jayavarman II died around 850 AD, leaving behind not just a kingdom, but a template forkingship that would endure for over 600 years. His legacy was the understanding that power in this land was not defined by military strength alone, but by the ability to orchestrate 3 things perfectly: the water, the worship, and the architecture. The foundation of the empire was laid, but the dream was far from its magnificent peak. The focus now shifted entirely toward perfecting the relationship between the city and the cosmos. The kings who followed, particularly Indravarman I, dedicated their reigns to perfecting the hydraulic engine that sustained the populace and solidified the king's reputation as the provider. The Great Beret of Lolé, commissioned by Indravarman I, was a colossal undertaking that spanned several kilometers. The labor was immense, forcing the entire population to participate in the slow, meticulous creation of the vast earthwork embankment. This wasn't merely a reservoir. It was a visible symbol of the king's immense power and his divine responsibility. Imagine the sensation of working on that wall. The relentless, unfiltered sun beating down on the back of the neck. The smell of sweat and dust mingling with the heavy, humid air. The sound of thousands of bare feet scuffing the earth. The hiss of the rope as the full basket is hoisted. The gentle plop as the earth is dumped and tamped down. In this deafening quiet, the sound of organized, purposeful mass labor, a deep, resonant rumble that defined the birth of the state. The success of the berets meant a reliable surplus of rice. This surplus, in turn, fed the huge labor force, allowing them to devote less time to subsistence farming and more time to centralized tasks building temples, carving stone, and serving the court. The hydraulic system was therefore not just irrigation, it was the mechanism of political and artistic patronage. As the 9th century drew to a close, the Khmer Empire, still centered around Hariharalaya, had achieved stability and wealth. The city, though built mostly of wood and thatch, was beautiful, its ordered symmetry reflecting the ordered mind of its rulers. The scent of exotic woods and imported oils, brought in through growing trade networks, now mingled with the familiar smell of rice and water. The power was concentrated, the spiritual mandate was clear, and the resource engine was humming with efficiency. But the king's capital, Hariharalaya, felt too constrained. It was the launching pad, not the true cosmic center. The grander vision, the true eternal city of stone, still awaited its builder. This next step would require a physical relocation, a decisive break from the old center to establish a new, even more potent nexus. It was a move toward the eventual location of Angkor proper, the moment when the blueprint, so carefully drawn by Jayavarman II, would begin to be executed in the massive, glorious scale that defines the civilization. The new focus would be on the creation of an enduring sandstone architecture, replacing the earlier, more vulnerable brick. The air thickens once more with the promise of change. The sounds of the old capitolare beginning to give way to the silence of preparation, the careful, measured gathering of resources and will for the next great act of creation. The Age of the Great Khmer Empire. Part 3, The Journey to Yashodarapura and the Sandstone Revelation, the Empire, consolidated by Jayavarman II's cosmic mandate and fortified by Indravarman I's hydraulic masterpieces, now rested on a steady foundation of rice surplus and spiritual hierarchy. Yet the capital at Hariharalaya, while prosperous, was not considered the ultimate, permanent center. The vision of the true cosmic city, the wandering manifestation of Mount Meru, demanded a new, grander location, a virgin space for a pristine beginning. The air around the court of Yashovarman I, who ascended the throne around 889 AD, crackled with a focused energy. He was a king of learning and immense ambition, deeply immersed in the Sanskrit texts and the geometry of the cosmos. He understood that to make his mark eternal, he needed to shift the axis of the kingdom. The chosen site lay several kilometers to the northwest, near the Kulen Hills landscape that offered an ideal combination of flat land for the hydraulic grid and proximity to the sandstone quarries. This proximity was critical. The future of the empire's architecture lay not in the reddish, rough brick and laterite of the past, but in the smoother, more perfect grey and white sandstone that could be shaped into breathtaking detail. Imagine the scouting parties sent out by the king. They move silently through the dense, high jungle where the air is cool and still, smelling intensely of decaying wood and rich humus. The sunlight is fragmented, creating shifting mosaics of gold and shadow on the forest floor. The only sounds are the rustle of their cotton sampots against the thick undergrowth, the rhythmic swipe of machetes clearing the way, and the calls of exotic birds echoing in the green dome above. Yashovarman, I selected a prominent and natural hill in the center of the chosen site Phnom Bakeng, a gentle mound that perfectly fit the philosophical requirement, a pre-existing elevation that could serve as the symbolic Mount Meru for his new city. This city would be named Yashodarapura, the city that bears glory, and it would be the first truly great city of the Angkor era. The construction of Yashodarapura began with the most crucial element, water control. The king commanded the creation of the East Barai, Yashodaratataka, a monumental reservoir approximately 7 kilometers long and 1.8 kilometers wide. Its sheer scale dwarfed any previous attempts. The mobilization of the labor force was staggering. Tens of thousands of workers, farmers, soldiers, slaves, and villagers were diverted to this single, earth-moving effort. The work was continuous, a marathon of simple, raw human effort. The sound of this labor was a continuous, low-frequency hum, the shh of woven baskets being filled with earth, the soft thud-thud as the dirt was deposited and tamped down, and the collective groan of men hauling heavy loads on bamboo poles. This sound was the living proof of the king's absolute, centralizing power a man capable of, commanding the very landscape to change its form. The air around the Barai was thick with dust and moisture, the scent of churned-up earth and sun-heated stagnant water. Every worker, clad only in a loincloth, was coated in a fine layer of reddish-brown silt, blending them into the very material they were moving. This was the Empire's breathing deep, slow, and powered by collective will. While the Barai was being dug, the focus simultaneously turned to the creation of the central temple mountain on Phnom Bakeng. This was the moment the dream of stone architecture truly began. The logistics of stone transport were themselves an epic undertaking. The finest, hardest grey sandstone lay in the quarries of Phnom Kulen, some 50 kilometers away. This stone had to be expertly extracted, shaped into massive perfect blocks, and then transported across difficult terrain, through jungle and over rivers, to the building site. Imagine the sound of the quarry, the sharp, metallic clink of steel chisels striking the granite-like sandstone, the ringing echo in the natural rock amphitheater, followed by the deep crack as a large block is finally separated from the bedrock. This was a new sound in the Khmer world, the sound of permanence being carved out of time. The air here was sharp with the scent of pulverized stone dust and the oil used to maintain the tools. The blocks, once cut, were floated down rivers and canals, their slow, silent transit across the water a stark contrast to the frantic effort on land. Imagine a massive square block of pale stone, lashed securely to a small raft, gliding almost magically across the calm surface of a newly completed canal, reflecting the brilliant blue of Theski. The Phnom Bakeng Temple Mountain rose in 5 broad, concentric tiers, built of flaterite and faced almost entirely with the newly available sandstone. The structure was not merely a building. It was a mandala, a diagram of the universe. It was oriented precisely to the cardinal points, its central sanctuary aligned with the pole star, representing the unwavering center of the cosmos and the king. The experience of climbing Bakeng was designed to be profound. The slope is gentle but relentless. As one ascends, the geometric purity of Yashodarapura, the immense square of the Barai, the perfectly straight lines of the city walls and roads unfolds beneath, visually confirming the king's ability to impose cosmic order on the chaotic jungle. Yashovarman. I was a great patron of learning, and his city was designed to reflect this scholarly focus. Surrounding the center, he established huge monasteries called ashrama, dedicated to various Hindu sects and Buddhism. These were not just places of worship. They were centers of learning, housing thousands of priests, scholars, and artisans. The life within these ashrama was one of quiet, ordered study. Imagine the interior of one of the long wooden halls. The light is dim, filtered through lattices, carrying the centerfold, dry palm leaf manuscripts and heated beeswax. The sounds are soft. The rhythmic, scratchy whisper of a scholar's stylus marking characters on a olla leaf, the low murmur of students reciting Sanskrit verses, and the peaceful, deep breathing of those in meditation. The artisans of the city, now provided with high-quality sandstone, began to refine their craft dramatically. The earlier, blocky, powerful carvings of the brick temples gave way to a new style, the Bakeng style, characterized by its delicate, flowing lines and an increasing focus on naturalistic forms. Imagine the sculptor at work. He sits patiently, cross-legged, before a finished smooth block of sandstone that is to become a magnificent Devata, female deity. The only sound is the focused tap-tap-tap of his light wooden mallet against the end of a fine steel chisel. The stone yields slowly, meticulously, releasing the figure within. The scent off the freshly cut stone is sharp and mineral. The Devatas and Apsaras that adorned Bakeng were not just decoration. They were the celestial inhabitants of the king's cosmic mountain. Their soft, serene faces, often wearing a slight, enigmatic smile, represent the eternal beauty and peace of the divine realm that the king sought to emulate on earth. Their elaborate headdresses and flowing, intricately pleated garments were rendered in stone with breathtaking patience, capturing the subtle texture of fine silk and heavy jewelry. Life in Yashodharapura itself was a vibrant tapestry of order and activity. The city proper, within the walls, was immense, yet the vast majority of its buildings, the homes, markets, and municipal structures were still made of wood, reflecting the ephemeral, temporary nature of earthly existence compared to the eternal stone of the gods. The streets were wide and perfectly straight, lined with towering teak and mango trees that provided cooling shade. The constant flow of people merchants, farmers bringing produce from the beret-fed fields, court officials and monks created a low, continuous murmur of human activity. The smells of the city were rich and varied, the sweet, heavy scent of overripe mangoes, the sharp tang of fermented fish paste, prahok, the smoky aroma of cooking fires, and the pervasive floral sweetness of frangipani and jasmine used in daily offerings. The political focus of Yashovarman I was one of continuous measured expansion and control. His mandate from the Devaraja ritual gave him the authority, but the hydraulic system gave him the wealth and control necessary to enforce it. The canals were the lifelines of the empire, transporting not just water but goods, messages, and military detachments quickly and efficiently. The construction of causeways and bridges over the water systems was a constant engineering concern. Imagine the slow, meticulous placement of massive stone blocks to form a stable bridge pier. The water rushing around the feet of the workers. The constant need for precision against the power of the current. Yashovarman I ruled for many years, successfully establishing Yashodharapura as the undisputed center of the Khmer world. He died having given the empire its defining shape, the immense square hydraulic city, centered on the Temple Mountain and powered by the divine legitimacy of the Devaraja cult. However, the period immediately following his death was not one of smooth sailing. The succession was briefly unsettled, and the center of power shifted again, temporarily moving away from Phnom Bakeng. This brief pause in continuous construction, this moment of political uncertainty, serves only to highlight the fragility of even the greatest human endeavors and the critical dependence on a singular, powerful vision. The jungle, ever patient, begins its slow, silent reclaim when human effort falters. Vines creep up the new sandstone terraces, and moss starts to settle on the smooth faces of the carved devatas. But the template was set. The Bare held the water, and the cosmic order was enshrined in stone on Phnom Bakeng. The brief shifts in capital in the early 10th century, including the move to Koh Ker by King Jayavarman IV, were ultimately just deviations from the gravitational pull of Yashodharapura, which had the perfect balance of resources, geology, and spiritual centrality. The essence of the Khmer civilization was now permanently tethered to this specific location, waiting for the next great builder to consolidate the design and push the architecture toward its ultimate perfection. The massive blocks of sandstone, patiently waiting in the quarries and along the canals, were the silent promise of the golden age yet to come. The entire landscape, ordered and controlled, was now a monument to the first great journey of the empire. The Age of the Great Khmer Empire, Part 4, the apex of artistry and the reign of Suryavarman. The Khmer capital, Yashodharapura, anchored by the towering symmetry of Phnom Bakeng and the immense, life-giving basin of the East Baray, had cemented its place as the spiritual and political center of the empire. After the brief, politically turbulent period following the death of Yashovarman I Shigua, the 10th and early 11th centuries saw a continuous, steady refinement of both the hydraulic systems and the architectural style, leading to a new, breathtaking sophistication. The air of the city, now nearly 2 centuries old, was settled, bearing the familiar scents of damp earth, cooking spices, and the heavy perfume of offerings. The sounds were those of a mature civilization. The rhythmic clang of the silversmith, the quiet, focused tap-tap of the stone carver, and the constant low murmur of trade in the great marketplace. The city was prosperous, its wealth flowing directly from the inexhaustible supply of water and rice. This long middle period was a time of deep cultural and artistic refinement. The architects and sculptors, now working with generations of inherited knowledge and their liable supply of sandstone, moved beyond the powerful, symbolic blockiness of the early structures toward an art form characterized by incredible grace, naturalism, and decorative complexity. Imagine a sculptor's studio. Not a dusty field, but a shaded, ordered workshop near the temple site. The light is diffused, allowing the craftsman to see the subtle planes and shadows of his work. The raw, pale sandstone blocks sit waiting, and the air smells intensely of whetstone and metal. The figures emerging from the stone, the apsaras, celestial dancers, and the devatas, female divinities, became the iconic face of Khmer. Art. They were rendered in stone with such sensitivity that the viewer can almost feel the lightness of their flowing garments and the warmth of their skin. Their smiles, known as the Angkor smile, are gentle, serene and deeply meditative, embodying the calm, unwavering faith of the empire. The carving of their jewelry and headdresses alone was a monumental act of patience. Imagine the concentration required to etch tiny rows of perfect pearl necklaces, intricate floral designs, and the elaborate folding of their sampots into the hard stone. This was not mere decoration. It was an act of devotion, transforming the raw material of the earth into a vision of paradise. The shift in religious patronage during this time was also critical. While the Devaraja cult focused on Shiva, represented by the linga, the empire increasingly embraced Vishnu, the preserver, and later, Buddhism. This religious tolerance and synthesis led to an even richer artistic output, as sculptors had to master the iconography of multiple, complex pantheons. The great monument of the mid-11th century, the Bafuon, commissioned by Udayadityavarman II, was the largest structure built up to that point. It was dedicated to Shiva and was a 3-tiered temple mountain in the form of a pyramid. Built primarily of sandstone, it rose hundreds of feet into the humid sky, its summit the temporary residence of the king's linga. The challenge of building the Bafuon was not just its height, but the sheer volume of perfectly cut sandstone required. Imagine the continuous chain of human labor necessary to haul these blocks up the steep, tiered slopes. The sound was a combination of heavy hauling and the constant, low-voiced exhortations of the overseers, maintaining the rhythm of the ascent. The Bafuon represented the apex of the Hindu temple mountain concept before the final, ultimate form of Angkor Wat. Its immense, intricate bas-reliefs, though mostly collapsed now, originally covered kilometers of wall space, illustrating scenes from Hindu epics like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. The creation of these bas-reliefs was a continuous, meticulous process. Imagine the stonemasons working side by side, day after day for years, slowly chipping away at the massive gallery walls. The air is cool in the shaded corridors, the scent is of pulverized limestone, and the sound is the unified, constant tink-tink-tink of hundreds of chisels working in harmony, creating a colossal, frozen narrative. The city itself was the world of the Khmer. Life was structured, predictable, and deeply religious. Daily rituals permeated every level of society. At dawn, the sound of gongs and drums would echo from the central temple, calling the priests to the first puja worship. The scent of fresh flowers and burning resin would drift across the city, as families made their offerings at small household shrines. The clothing of the common people remained simple cotton, but the royal court grew increasingly magnificent. Imagine a royal procession moving through the city streets. The sight is a feast of color and texture. The king's retinue adorned in silks of deep sapphire, brilliant gold and ruby red, shimmering in the intense sunlight. The sound of the procession is a mixture of the soft, padded footfalls of the elephants, the rhythmic beat of hand drums and the sweet, high notes of bamboo flutes. The true apex of this period of refined strength was the rise of Suryavarman II in 11 or 13 AD. He was a powerful military leader who consolidated the empire's borders, but his true legacy was the temple he built to house his soul and honor his patron deity. Vishnu, Angkor Wat Suryavarman II was driven by an ambition that dwarfed all previous kings. He decided to build a structure that would not just represent Mount Meru, but would be the most perfect, eternal reflection of the Hindu cosmos on Earth, integrating the Temple Mountain concept with the sprawling gallery temple. The site chosen was a new area adjacent to Yashodarapura, slightly to the south and west of the existing city. The work began as always with the water. The first step was digging the outer moat, a perfectly square trench of colossal dimensions, intended to represent the cosmic ocean that encircles Mount Meru. The sheer scale of the earth moved for the moat, and the later central temple platform is almost impossible to comprehend. Imagine the silence of the work, not a clamorous, chaotic noise, but a disciplined, steady effort. The sound of the damp soil being cut, the splash of water as it seeped into the ditch, and the low, uniform chant used by the laborers to maintain their pace. A sound that resonated with the empire's deep, collective power. The construction of Angkor Wat was a continuous process that lasted throughout Suryavarman II's reign, and even beyond his death. The logistics was staggering, sourcing, cutting, and transporting millions of tons of sandstone from Phnom Kulen, 40 kilometers away. This required a permanent, dedicated infrastructure, vast teams of carvers at the quarry, teams of haulers moving the stone across the plains, and thousands of skilled masons, and laborers assembling the colossal puzzle at the site. The masons who worked on Angkor Wat developed techniques that remain astonishing. The sandstone blocks were cut so precisely that they fit together almost perfectly, without the need for mortar. They were then pinned in place with metal dowels. The surface of the stone was so smooth that the final, delicate carving could be done after the wall or column was erected. Imagine standing inside one of the newly roofed galleries during the carving process. The air is cool and still, trapped between the massive stone walls. The sound of 100 chisels tapping simultaneously creates a crystalline, hypnotic rhythm, the sound of an entire civilization, dedicating its labor to the divine vision. The bas-reliefs of Angkor Wat, covering nearly 12,000 square meters, are the ultimate achievement of the Khmer narrative art, dedicated primarily to the acts of Vishnu and the military victories of Suryavarman II, often depicted in parallel with the gods. They serve as a visual, eternal record of the king's glory. The light inside the galleries is subdued, emphasizing the texture and depth of the carving. The stone is a subtle, silver grey which seems to soften and change hue with the shifting sunlight. The sheer labor represented here, the thousands of hours of painstaking work, speaks of a culture where art and devotion were utterly inseparable. Suryavarman II's era saw the full, integrated flourishing of the water systems and the architecture. The entire city of Yashodarapura, now encompassing Angkor Wat, was not just a city. It was a vast, working hydrological machine, ensuring the prosperity that fueled the massive building projects. The canals, fields, and temples formed one single, symbiotic organism. The deep devotion to the Hindu deities was expressed in every corner of the temple. The sheer number of apsaras, over 1,800 unique figures, adorns the walls of Angkor Wat. They are poised, dancing, or standing in meditation, their presence transforming the stone walls into the celestial court of Indra. The construction process demanded immense control over resources and people. The king's court was at its most magnificent, managing not only the spiritual and military life, but the intricate details of supply, labor scheduling, and technical problem-solving. Every official in the court, from the chief royal priest to the foreman of the quarry, was a dedicated piece of this immense puzzle. The air in the capital during this time was vibrant, buzzing with the purposeful activity of a kingdom at its zenith, yet still retaining the underlying serenity mandated by the Buddhist and Hindu philosophy that permeated every action. The slow, steady rise to this architectural peak from the early wooden shrines, through the brick temples of Hariharalaya, the sandstone temple mountain of Bakeng, in the immense Bafuon, culminated in the geometric and artistic perfection of Angkor Wat, a structure that would forever define the Khmer genius. The empire stood at its highest point of cultural and architectural self-expression, a moment of steady grandeur, built not on sudden conquest, but on the disciplined, centuries-long mastery of water and stone, the age of the great Khmer Empire. Part 5, the zenith of Angkor Wat and the rise of the beyond the reign of Suryavarman II, characterized by the colossal undertaking of Angkor Wat, represented the peak of the Hindu cosmological vision in the Khmer Empire. However, the completion of this magnificent temple did not mark the end of the empire's architectural or spiritual journey. Rather, it set the stage for an even more profound transformation. Imagine the finished Angkor Wat standing proud in the intense tropical daylight. The air is still, the sun reflecting brilliantly off the calm, glassy surface of the enormous moat that encircles the complex. The water is a deep, tranquil blue-green, an utterly silent representation of the cosmic ocean. The only sound is the gentle, steady rustle of the massive, ancient trees that line the long, wide causeway leading to the western gate. The scent here is different from the dusty city. It is cleaner, infused with the fragrance of the moist earth from the moat and the cooling effect of the water. Angkor Wat is not merely a temple. It is a meticulously crafted geometric expression of time and space. The distance of the causeway, the height of the 3 ascending galleries, the number of its towers all hold deep, specific cosmological meaning, aligning the temple not just with the cardinal directions, but with the very structure of the Hindu universe. Suryavarman II died around 1150 AD, and the following decades were tumultuous. The sheer effort expended on Angkor Wat, coupled with military campaigns, likely strained the empire's resources. This weakness was tragically exposed in 1177 AD, when a foreign power, the Chams from the eastern coast, modern Vietnam, launched a surprise naval attack, sailing up the river systems and sacking the capital, Yashodharapura. This invasion was a profound shock to the Khmer psyche. For centuries, the king, the Devaraja, had promised cosmic order and protection. The sacking of the capital, the destruction of the wooden palace, and the desecration of the sacred centers was a devastating betrayal of that promise. The sound of the sacking was chaotic and terrible, the shouts of invaders, the splintering of wood, and the screams of the terrified populace, a sharp, jarring sound that contrasted brutally with the measured, rhythmic peace of the city's construction. From this chaos, a new, indomitable figure emerged to reclaim the empire's destiny, Jayavarman VII. He was already an elderly prince, yet possessed of unparalleled strategic genius and spiritual vision. He led the resistance against the Chams, culminating in a decisive, naval victory. But his experience of war and destruction fundamentally changed the spiritual trajectory of the empire. He did not return to the Hindu focus of his predecessors. Instead, he embraced Mahayana Buddhism and, more specifically, the benevolent power of the Bodhisattva Lokeshvara, the compassionate being who delays nirvana to help all sentient life. Jayavarman VII did not just rebuild the capital, he utterly transformed it. He moved the center slightly and built a completely new city, Angkor Thom, the Great City, which would become the final, most ambitious expression of Khmer civilization. The construction began around 1181 AD and was undertaken with an intensity and speed unseen before. The East Barai had been the focus of earlier kings. Now Jayavarman VII focused on surrounding his new capital with an even more imposing structure. A perfectly square moat and massive, fortified walls, 8 meters high and 12 kilometers long, creating a defined, protected space for his people. The sheer scale of the stone required meant that all of Angkor Thom, not just the central temple, became a colossal, integrated engineering project. The king's soldiers became the labor force, mixing military discipline with the construction effort. The sound of the construction was a continuous, urgent symphony of stone striking stone, the metallic ringing of hammer against chisel, and the scraping of earth. The most iconic features of Angkor Thom are its 5 monumental gates, each crowned with 4 colossal, serene, smiling faces. These faces, facing the 4 cardinal directions, are believed to represent the Bodhisattva Lokeshvara, or perhaps the king himself in the guise of the Bodhisattva, watching over all his subjects in every corner of the realm. Imagine standing beneath the towering south gate. The air is cool beneath the massive stone archway. You look up at the stone faces, 20 feet tall, their heavy brows casting deep, serene shadows over their eyes. The soft, knowing Bayon smile is the final, ultimate evolution of the Khmer artistic ideal, a look of profound, eternal compassion that radiates down upon all who pass. The spiritual heart of this new city was the Bayon Jayavarman VII's state temple, positioned exactly at the geometric center of Angkor Thom. The Bayon is radically different from the ordered external symmetry of Angkor Wat. It is a bewildering, organic, and spiritually intense mass of stone, a forest of faces, originally perhaps over 200 colossal visages, gazing out from 54 towers. The feeling of entering the Bayon is one of being immediately enveloped. The corridors are narrow, the light is dim, and the space is intensely crowded with carved images. Everywhere you turn, another colossal, smiling face emerges from the stone, watching, judging, and soothing. The pervasive sound here is the quiet wonder of visitors, speaking in hushed tones, surrounded by the silent, eternal compassion of the stone bodhisattvas. The bas-reliefs of the Bayon, unlike the purely mythological and royal focus of Angkor Wat, depict the vibrant daily life of the empire. They are crowded with scenes of markets, cockfighting, fishing, battles with the chams, and common people at leisure. This shift reflects Jayavarman VII's Buddhist focus on the welfare of the people, the bodhisattva's compassion for the suffering of all. Imagine the sheer volume of human detail carved into these gallery walls. Sculptor painstakingly rendered every texture, the scales of fish in a river, the rough, woven hats of the market vendors, the delicate folds of a dancer's skirt, the expressions of joy and suffering. Jayavarman VII's grand vision extended far beyond the capital. He initiated an unprecedented program of public works, embodying his commitment to alleviating suffering. He built a network of 102 hospitals across the empire, ensuring that his people, the very reason for the bodhisattva's presence, were cared for. Imagine the sound and feel of one of these public hospitals. It is a large, well-ventilated wooden structure, cool and clean. The air is filled with the strong, herbaceous scent of medicinal plants being brewed in clay pots. There are no sharp, clanging sounds, only the soft footsteps of the healers and the quiet murmurs of the recovering patients. The care was available to all, regardless of status, a radical expression of state-sponsored compassion. He also built hundreds of rest houses, or houses of fire, along the newly maintained road network, providing shelter for travelers, pilgrims, and officials. These roads, straight and perfectly aligned, connected the vast empire, ensuring that the king's influence and compassion reached every corner of the realm. The sound of a lone traveler stopping at one of these rest houses, the creak of a weary elephant, the splash of cool water from a well, the sigh of relief was a subtle proof of the king's benevolent oversight. The entire empire under Jayavarman VII was an expression of his personal faith and his political commitment to his people. The culmination of this era was an explosion of architectural activity, leading to dozens of major temples, including Ta, Imbrom, and Preah Khan, dedicated to his mother and father respectively. These structures were not just temples, they were vast, complex monasteries and universities. Ta Prohm, dedicated to his mother, was endowed with immense wealth, supporting thousands of officials, priests, dancers, and laborers. It was a functioning economic entity built to sustain the devotion of the bodhisattva. Imagine the sound within the walls of Ta Prohm. Not the noise of construction, but the sounds of a living, breathing institution, the rhythmic striking of the bronze gong signaling prayer time, the soft singing of hymns by the Buddhist monks, the distant sound of water being drawn from the massive cisterns, and the pervasive, gentle hum of cicadas in the surrounding trees. The Bayon and the entire city of Angkor Thom represented the ultimate, highest point of the Khmer political, religious, and architectural ambition. The city was a perfect square mandala, centered on the king's compassionate face. The hydraulic system had been perfected to serve a massive population, and the stone artistry had achieved its most emotive and expressive style. Jayavarman VII died around 1218 AD, leaving behind the largest, most centralized, and most complex state ever to emerge in Southeast Asia. His legacy was a new, softer, more compassionate face carved onto the enduring stone of the empire. This period of the Bayon style, with its intense focus on the compassionate, ever-present face, was the final, grand gesture of the building kings. It was the climax of 4 centuries of continuous artistic and engineering effort. The empire had achieved its ultimate size, its greatest population, and its most expressive architecture. The silence that followed the death of the great builder was heavy, the air thick with the realization that such a monumental era of tireless creation could not and would not continue forever. The Age of the Great Khmer Empire. Part 6. The Slow Recessional and the Enduring Legacy. The death of Jayavarman VII, the great builder and compassionate bodhisattva, marked the final, highest point of centralized imperial activity in Angkor. The climax had passed, and the empire now entered a long, slow period of recessional, not a sudden, dramatic collapse, but a gradual, centuries-long winding down of the immense energies that had fueled the construction of the colossal city. The air in Angkor Thom, the great city, still carried the sense of prosperity incense, cooking rice, and wet stone, but beneath this, a subtle change took root. The frenetic pace of construction, the constant sound of chisels and the hauling of stone that had defined the city for 4 centuries now began to fade into a quieter existence. The king's coffers, depleted by the immense scale of Jayavarman VII's building and welfare programs, could no longer support the continuous, large-scale maintenance required for such a massive hydraulic and architectural complex. The first subtle signs of decline were the neglected waterworks, the vast barrays, and the intricate network of canals. The very engine of the empire's wealth required tireless, organized labor to keep them clear of silt and repaired. When this labor faltered even slightly, the consequences were slow but catastrophic. Silt began to choke the smaller canals, and the massive embankments developed small, then larger, breaches that went unrepaired. Imagine the sound near a section of a neglected canal. The rhythmic flow of the water is now interrupted by a slow, dull, squelching sound as a worker struggles through thick, accumulated mud trying to clear a blockage that, just a generation ago, would have been addressed immediately by an organized corps of engineers. The scent of the water is slightly more stagnant. In the surrounding fields, once emerald green, show patches of dry, cracked earth. The Khmer Empire did not fall due to a single, decisive military defeat, but because of this slow, internal decay of its foundational infrastructure. The inability to manage the water eventually meant the inability to produce the vast rice surplus needed to feed the enormous population and the vast court. As the surplus waned, so too did the power of the Devaraja and the resources available to maintain the great stone temples. A crucial shift also occurred in religion. While Mahayana Buddhism had been the state religion under Jayavarman VII, the empire gradually embraced Theravada Buddhism tradition that focused more on individual salvation through monastic life and ethical conduct, rather than on the grand, cosmic, state-sponsored spectacle of the Hindu or Mahayana cults. This change had profound architectural implications. Instead of building massive, new stone temple mountains to house the king's linga or a bodhisattva, resources were diverted to building smaller, simpler wooden wats, monasteries, and stupas, which were easier and cheaper to maintain. The focus of devotion shifted from the monumental stone temple to the local, living community of monks. The great stone temples, though still revered, became the domain of the monks and were gradually adapted. Imagine the interior of Angkor Wat in the 14th century. The elaborate Hindu bas-reliefs are still visible, but new, simple wooden Buddha statues are placed on the altars. The air is thick with the sweet, constant scent of hundreds of small beeswax candles and simple, burning incense. The sound is the low, repetitive drone of Theravada chanting, a softer, less dramatic sound than the elaborate Sanskrit rituals of the past. The political power center began to fracture and migrate. Warfare with emerging Thai kingdoms to the west, particularly Sukhothai and Ayutthaya, became more frequent and draining. Each conflict pulled precious manpower away from the essential tasks of hydraulic maintenance and defense. After the final devastating sack of Angkor by Ayutthaya in 1431 AD, the court made the decisive, permanent move away from the great city, relocating the capital to a more easily defensible location, closer to the Mekong River. The great capital of Yashodharapura, Angkor Thom, was not abandoned suddenly, but slowly and deliberately by the ruling elite. The vast population of farmers and commoners, tied to the fertile land, remained for some time, but the colossal, expensive engine of the court, the priests, the stone carvers, and the administrators, simply moved on. As the human presence and the constant maintenance ceased, the jungle, the original power against which the entire civilization had fought, began its long, patient work of reclamation. This is the quiet aftermath, the final deep lull of the narrative. Imagine the atmosphere in Ta Prohm in the 16th century. The sound of human activity has almost completely ceased. Now the sounds are purely natural, the constant, deafening hum of the cicadas in the midday heat, the chirping of lizards, and the distant, slow creak as the massive silk cotton and strangler fig roots the silent, implacable engineers of nature slowly wedge themselves between the perfectly fitted sandstone blocks. The jungle's embrace was paradoxical. It was the agent of destruction, dismantling the walls, scattering the stones, and swallowing the roads. Yet it was also the great preserver. The dense canopy protected the temples from the full, destructive force of the sun and rain, hiding them from the sight of later invaders and ensuring their structural survival until rediscovery. Angkor Wat, protected by its immense moat, remained largely intact and continuously occupied by a small community of Buddhist monks. Its massive walls and sheer scale protected it from the worst ravages of the forest and neglect. It became a pilgrimage site, its stone walls bearing the testimony of visitors who traveled far to see the city that is a temple. The legacy of the Khmer Empire is not one of failure, but of enduring, colossal ambition. The stones of Angkor speak of a civilization that mastered the environment, harnessing chaotic water to create stable, eternal power. They speak of an artistic tradition that moved from blocky symbolism to the most delicate, compassionate realism. Luzerine, watching faces of the Bayon and the dancing, beatific apsaras of Angkor Wat remain, silent witnesses to a spiritual devotion that compelled kings and commoners alike to move mountains. The sound of this legacy is now the whisper of the wind moving across the long, grassy fields that were once the Great Berets, the gentle lapping of the water in the ancient moats, in the quiet, steady breath of the world. It is a profound, deep sound of timelessness, the ultimate peace. Allow yourself to feel the weight of these centuries of labor, faith, and artistry. The story of Angkor is a testament to the fact that even the greatest cities eventually return to the earth from which they were built, leaving behind a beauty that only sleep can truly appreciate. May your contemplation of this ancient, quiet kingdom bring you deep rest and peace.